Why, hello there, YouTube, and welcome to a brand new series that I'm doing called A History of Who. So, it is November 23rd, Doctor Who Day, by the time this video is up. And of course, 23rd of November is a special day for us Whovians because it is the anniversary of the show. So, last year the show celebrated its 60th year, and 61 years ago today, Doctor Who premiered for the first time. So let's, you know, do a history lesson of it. I mean, a lot of Who fans like myself will probably know the history of this show by now. We've seen it all in the docudrama, An Adventure in Space and Time. I thought, why don't I give you my own retrospective and look back at the past of the show's history? So, the beginning. So, it was 1963. Sidney Newman had become the head of the drama department at the BBC, who I believe at the time was a bit of a huge deal because he was not British, he was Canadian. He approached two show creators, Donald Wilson and C. Webber, and then also his former assistant, Verity Lambert, saying that he wants to make a science fiction serial, something that would be educational to kids, that would teach them science and history. So they went off and brainstormed, and they came back with the idea of a show called Doctor Who. Who exactly? Now, the show in its developing stages was not taken seriously. In fact, not a lot of people had a lot of hope or faith in it. Verity Lambert stated to Sidney Newman that she didn't want to be his assistant again on another product, but he didn't want her to be his assistant. No, he wanted her to produce it. Now, again, this was a huge deal because the BBC didn't really have a female producer at the time, and they went ahead and did it. So Verity Lambert became quite the, deal back then. And of course, with this science fiction serial underway, they had to come up with sets and stuff. Only done on a tight budget. They needed to think of things, how this show would be educational to children, and how it would draw in the views. So they started working on the show. And when they needed to cast people, they thought, let's have a science teacher and a history teacher in, as that's the main focus of the show. So they had Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright, which would be played by the late William Russell and Jacqueline Hill. And then they thought, let's give a younger character for the kids to relate to, Susan Forbin, who would go on to be the title character's granddaughter. But of course, the most important part of this was the character, Doctor Who. Who is he? No one seems to know, hence the show's title. So they looked around, Verity Lambert thought, let's have him as a grandfather figure with a dash of H.G. Wells and Father Christmas in there. They looked around and they considered a few faces, but one actor that they did find impressive was actor William Hartnell, who, of course, at his time was known for his roles as like drill sergeants in films such as the first ever Carry On film, Carry On Sergeant, and also other roles where he played a tough leader. William Hartnell was a bit, reluctant at first, but quickly took to the role and then became the lead actor in the show. So they got working on it. They had to work on a set and a machine. Now, given that this was meant to be educational and teach people science and history, they thought this is going to have to be a show about time travel. So they thought, let's build a time machine. A time machine that would go on to become the TARDIS. Who in the first episode, Susan stated she came up with TARDIS from its initial, TARDIS, time and relative dimensions in space, which caught on and became a thing with Time Lord mythology, TARDISes, time machines. But they never really picked up on that since Susan should have been credited for coming up with that, because Well, you know, at that time, the Doctor was unknown. I mean, he didn't have an actual name or planet of origin or anything like that. No, the Doctor was seen as a mysterious enigma, an old man that was a lot more older than he looked, a lot mysterious, not of this people, not of this earth. And all that we knew that him and his granddaughter Susan were on the run from his people, which we would go on to later know as the Time Lords. So they began going with this. But Sidney Newman specifically stated, if this is going to be science fiction, no BEMs, bug-eyed monsters. And of course they did by the second serial when he told them that too little too late. The idea for the TARDIS was for it to blend into its surroundings wherever it goes. So with it starting in 1963, they thought, let's disguise it as a blue police public call box, which back in the 50s and the 60s they used as a communication thing for people to call the police, and police would lock an arrested person in the police box as a little cell till backup came, which is what they were used for back then. But of course, recent times, these police boxes that we once used would go on to be known as a TARDIS because of the culture of the show. And the original idea was for it to blend into its surroundings wherever it goes and would change every episode. But with them being on a tight budget and a tight schedule, they didn't have that kind of time or money to do that. So they thought, let's keep this as a blue police box, have this chameleon circuit that causes it to change, break, and make it clear in the second episode. So they had it all ready. Anthony Coburn wrote the first ever serial, which would go on to be An Unearthly Child, and it would be directed by Waris Hussein, who again at that time was an Indian origin, was an Indian director, but also closeted. But given the time he lived in, he couldn't be out and proud about that like he is now. But that's what the show was about. The show was about pushing boundaries by having a female producer and an English Asian director for the first ever serial. So the episode aired. It was a cold, wet night in November 23rd, 1963, and Doctor Who aired. And did it do good with the views? No, it didn't. Because if you know the date, 23rd of November 1963, you know the day before, on the 22nd of November, the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy had occurred the day before. So that was all over the news, and with that being a big historical event, viewing figures were not as how they hoped. So Verity Lambert insisted that they re-aired the same episode the following week, and the following week it did. And the viewing figures went off the charts. Originally meant to last 6 episodes, the first serial follows the Doctor kidnapping his granddaughter's teachers, Ian and Barbara, taking them back to cavemen times where they would be in an ordeal with cavemen, and then after escaping the cavemen would land on another planet, a planet called Skaro, which would be the debut of what would become another key part of the show, the Daleks. Now, like Sidney Newman said, no BEMs, bug-eyed monsters, and the Daleks were that. And didn't like this idea, but it was too short notice to change it. The Daleks, not knowing which Dalek was talking, they then decided to put little flashing lights on the heads, on the domes of the Daleks, so they would know which one's talking. Originally meant to be equipped with a claw. The budget being so tight, they resorted to looking in a stock cupboard and found plungers. So that ended up being the part of the Dalek, which has worked for 60 years now. And of course the Daleks would go on to be known for Exterminate, Exterminate, and also would be created by writer Terry Nation, who must be proud of his creation because look where it's got him. Look where it is now with the show. And Terry Nation would go on to write a lot of Dalek serials in the classic era. So yes, going beyond the 6 episodes, and the Daleks, viewing figures were brilliant. Sidney Newman wasn't sure at first, but after seeing the views go up, he had a change of heart and let Verity Lambert take full lead of the show. And of course, it all went well. This was something that had never been aired before on television and would go on to last for 6 decades. Of course, in 1964, Carole Ann Ford decided she wanted to move on from playing her character Susan, and she did. Of course, William Russell and Jacqueline Hill stayed on for at least another year with Bill, William Hartnell, and they would introduce new companions such as Vicky, and then others. Eventually, Ian and Barbara would find their way back to Earth, and that's where William Russell and Jacqueline Hill would depart the show. Not only that, but Verity Lambert also decided to call it a day as well and leave as show producer. For William Hartnell, things just didn't quite feel the same with new cast members, new producers, and also his health. See, William Hartnell developed an illness where he was struggling to breathe and started having outbursts and outlashes with cast and crew and was becoming difficult to work with. So, after a tough decision, Sidney Newman told William Hartnell that they can't have things going on as they are, and that they want Doctor Who to continue, but not with him. Throughout his tenure, William Hartnell encountered not just Daleks, but also giant insects and even a celestial toy maker. And they decided that one idea at first, they thought, let's recast William Hartnell with a double, someone who looks like him and not notice he's changed. But they thought, no, the Doctor is of unearthly origin. Let's change things up a bit and recast him completely with a completely different actor. They looked around, and at one point they actually considered Brian Blessed, but he felt he was too young for a role like that. And of course, when Sidney Newman broke the news to Bill that he's being replaced, he showed him a photo of an actor named Patrick Troughton, who would go on to take over for William Hartnell for the rest of the 60s. William Hartnell didn't want to go. He was sad to be leaving and just had to go for his own benefit and the show's. In his final adventure, he would encounter another villain, another creature that would go on to become another key focus of the show and would go on to be the second most popular monster, the Cybermen. Not being brilliant at first, looking a bit dated now, but still very sinister and scary. And by the end of that serial, we would have a process which at that time was not called regeneration, as they didn't have a name for it. The name regeneration would come about in 1974, which we'll get to. No, but this was touch and go. They didn't know how fans would react to this, an actor completely changing and transitioning. But William Hartnell could rest assured, knowing that his successor and many after him would have got this. And this would go on to make it the longest science fiction show running. In 1966, excuse me a moment, let's look this up. Yeah, that's it. On October 29th, 1966, William Hartnell his character, the Doctor, would collapse onto the ground, stating that his body is wearing a bit thin, and for the first time ever, a bright light gloomed over him, and then out from it came another face. This is where Patrick Troughton would take over. And with him being the same character, yet a completely different person, they thought to Troughton, don't try and be like Hartnell. Patrick Troughton being a bit younger at the time, William Hartnell being 55 when he first played the Doctor and leaving at the age of 58. Patrick Troughton was 46 at that time, so a bit more younger and more better in health than his predecessor. But when he took on the role of the Doctor, he took on a blank canvas where he could reinvent the character of the Doctor and would go on to be a part of the show just as much as the Daleks, Cybermen, the TARDIS itself. And every actor would be given that, a blank canvas.